Welcome to the students. Today we're jumping into a real detective story, a mystery that's been thousands of years in the making, and the subject of our investigation, the English language itself. So let's just kick things off with the big question, the one you've probably asked yourself if you've ever tried to learn another language. Why is English so weird, Why are there so many exceptions to every rule? Why is the spelling such a mess? Well, our first major clue is the sheer size of the English vocabulary. I mean, it's enormous. Unlike a lot of other languages, English is like this massive linguistic scrapbook with layers and layers of words that tell a story of invasion, of culture clash, and of power. And here's a perfect example of what I mean. Notice how we often have two different words for the same thing? One word, like ask or child, feels pretty simple, kind of down to earth. The other, like demand or infant, sounds a little more formal, maybe a bit fancier. That's not a coincidence, folks. That's the linguistic footprint left behind by centuries of history. To really crack this case, we can't just look at the English we speak today. No, we've got to go back, way back. We need to trace the language's DNA all the way to its ancient family roots. And believe it or not, it all starts here, with a single prehistoric language. Most of the languages spoken today, from India all the way to Portugal, we're talking Hindi, Persian, Russian, Spanish, you name it, they all come from this one common ancestor. As these ancient tribes spread out, their language branched off and evolved, creating the hundreds of languages we know today. And this chart? Wow, it really shows you the whole family tree. You can see how languages like Latin and Greek are all cousins. But for our case, we're interested in that highlighted path. See it? That's our trail. And it leads us straight to a really important branch, the Germanic one. So this is key. The core, the absolute bedrock of the English language is Germanic. Around the year 600, these tribes came over and settled in Britain, and the language they brought with them would become what we now call Old English. The language of epic poems like Beowulf. But a foundation is just a starting point, right? This is where the plot really thickens, because the history of England is basically a story of one invasion after another, and every group that showed up left its fingerprints all over the language. So on this timeline, you can see the three major events that really shaped English. First, you got the Anglo-Saxons laying that Germanic foundation. Then the Vikings show up and add a totally new Scandinavian layer. And finally, 1066, the Norman conquest, which brings this tidal wave of French that changes everything. Okay, so first up are the Vikings. They raided and eventually settled all over England. And here's the interesting part. Their language, Old Norse, was also a Germanic language, so it was similar enough to Old English that they could kinda sorta understand each other, which made swapping words back and forth super easy. And this is where it gets absolutely wild. Just look at some of the words the Vikings gave us. Our most basic pronouns, they, their, them, are not originally English. They're Scandinavian. The same goes for everyday words like sky, skin, and take. The Vikings didn't just add to our dictionary, they actually rewired the engine of our language. But then came the big one, 1066, the Norman conquest. This is the event that really blows the case wide open. William the Conqueror brings over a whole new ruling class from France, and for the next 300 years, French is the language of power. We're talking the language of the king, the courts, the government, the whole shebang, and this created this incredible linguistic class divide that you can still see today. Check this out. The Anglo-Saxon peasants working in the fields kept their Germanic words for the animals, cow, pig, and sheep, but the French-speaking nobles sitting at the dinner table used their words for the meat, beef, pork, and mutton. You can literally see the social structure right there in the words. And it didn't just stop with food. The entire vocabulary of power, of government, of law, of the military was imported straight from French. So English ends up becoming this incredible hybrid language with a solid Germanic chassis, but with a fancy French body built right on top of it. So we've looked at the big external events, the invasions, but that's only half the story. A good detective knows you also have to look for the internal clues, these hidden, almost scientific rules that make language change all on its own. and that's where the science of linguistics comes in. Now, linguistics isn't about telling you what proper English is. It's about figuring out how language actually works, finding the patterns and systems that we all use without even thinking about it. Linguists will use tools like this sentence diagram. Now, I know it looks a little intimidating, but it's basically just a blueprint. It shows how we take little bits, like nouns and verbs, and build them up into bigger structures, like phrases and sentences. It reveals the hidden architecture of our thoughts. And one of the biggest discoveries ever made in linguistics is something called Grimm's Law. It's not a law like you can break. It's a description of a huge, predictable change in how consonants were pronounced thousands of years ago. It's a key piece of evidence that shows how Germanic languages split off from the rest of the family. Here's a perfect example of how it works. That ancient P sound in the parent language systematically changed into an F sound in all the Germanic languages. And that one simple shift explains why the Latin word pater is related to our word father, or why pes is related to foot. It's like a linguistic fingerprint that connects thousands of words. All right, but what about that crazy English spelling? Well, a huge chunk of the blame can be pinned on something called the Great Vowel Shift. This was a massive change in pronunciation that happened right around the time that the printing press was making spelling permanent. Talk about bad timing. Just look at this table. Back in Middle English, the word bite was pronounced more like beta, but that long E sound shifted to the I sound we use beat. The word meat was pronounced like mate. Basically, all the long vowel sounds shifted, but the spelling got frozen in time. That created the huge disconnect we all struggle with today. So, after looking at all the historical and linguistic evidence, where do we land? What's the final verdict in the mystery of the English language? The answer is that English isn't really weird at all. Its weirdness is just its life story. It's a living history book. It has a tough Germanic heart, a sophisticated French mind, and a practical Scandinavian spirit. All these different layers got pressed together over centuries, creating the rich, complex, and sometimes confusing language we all speak today. But you know the best part of this whole detective story? The case is never really closed. As a global language, English is changing and evolving every day, absorbing new words from all over the world. The story is still being written by its billion-plus speakers. So what do you think the next chapter will be?